Now, first of all, the word temptation comes from the Latin word tentare, which means to try or to test, which perhaps sounds a little benign. To try or to test doesn't seem to do justice to the word temptation, does it? It seems like there should be green slimy goo slowly dripping off the letters of the word temptation. And that's partly because these days, when we use the word temptation, we're specifically talking about an allurement to sin. But in reality, this kind of temptation is only one of the two basic forms. So, let's start by listing these two forms of temptation and then explaining them. Now, the first form of temptation is what we've already mentioned. They're called temptations of solicitation. These are the allurements to sin, the green gooey stuff. There's something bad being dangled in front of us, like an improper image, an invitation to gossip, or a deep-fried Twinkie. And these temptations of solicitation are an invitation to sin that directly or indirectly comes from the devil. And by directly, we mean just that. He, or one of his demons, is directly influencing us through superior spiritual powers. Don't forget that the evil one and his dark minions can suggest things to our imagination, tempt our senses, and propose evil to our mind. They can toy with us to a certain degree. Now, when we say we can be indirectly tempted, we're essentially talking about the general inclination to sin we all have as a result of Adam's failure in the garden. It's the famous threefold concupiscence from 1 John 2:16. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And these temptations of solicitation, these allurements to sin, basically come in two forms. First, there is the external form, like impure, improper images, the hearing of obscenities or suggestive speech, detraction, calumny, etc. But temptation isn't only found in external things. It can be found internally as well. For example, you can have evil thoughts or sensations of illicit pleasure suddenly spring to life inside of you, seemingly out of nowhere. You didn't do anything at that moment to directly cause them. They just showed up. We've all had that happen. All right, so that's the first kind, temptations of solicitation, which are always bad. The other kind are called temptations of probation. But instead of coming from the devil or our own inclination to sin, they come from God. And maybe you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, Matthew. Doesn't James 1:13 say, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God? For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one"? Yes, but we're not talking about being tempted to sin like St. James is discussing. Temptations of probation are special tests that God sometimes allows for a particular reason. Spiritual author Father Francis Remler writes that by temptations of probation, we understand all those special trials to which God subjects persons to prove their virtue, to prepare them for some particular work, or to elevate them to a very high degree of holiness. For example, in Genesis 22, God put Abraham's faith to an extreme test when he asked him to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Similarly, he allowed the devil to literally take everything away from poor Job so as to prove Job's righteousness. Tobit was persecuted, lost his belongings, and even his eyesight. We could easily add to the list people like St. Joseph, Our Lady, and a host of others who experienced trial and testing. And again, while we call it temptation, temptations of probation are not incitements to sin. God's not up in heaven surveying people down on earth saying, well, let's see, how can I make them fall today? He's not trying to make us sin. He's trying to prove our virtue. He's measuring our faith. He's testing our patience, our hope, our love. But why? Why would he do this? Well, because actions speak louder than words. It's easy to say you love God when things are sailing along. He wants to know how devoted you are when the bottom drops out of your world. It's a little bit like what your buddy is thinking when he asks you to help him pack up and move all the belongings of a 5-bedroom house which has been accumulating stuff for 30 years. Are you still his bosom buddy in the face of that request? Well, while there's pretty much nothing good that comes out of a request to help your friend move, tests from God should never be seen as negative.